This week's Torah reading, Parshat VaYetze, encompasses the entire foundation of the Jewish people that we are today. And the title of this class is Putting the Pieces Together. And the class is given Le'ilui Nishmat Moras Malka Bas Reb Mordechai, my late mother-in-law, who my daughter is named after, who was a Holocaust survivor, whose yahrzeit was today, Beit Kislev. We're now, with the sun down, it's the 3rd of Kislev, but we remember her well. So I'm going to talk about this idea of putting pieces together or connecting pieces together. And I want to begin with an interesting fact. We're gathered here to study Torah. And Torah, we know, is the ultimate engine for spiritual growth. Barati Sahara, that human beings have moral challenges placed in front of them. Barati Torah Tavlin. And the Torah is the engine of antidote that enables us to overcome moral challenges and to grow as individuals and to grow as a people and to fulfill our purpose in the world. That's our concept of Torah. Torah encompasses every aspect of a human being. So interestingly, if you look in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 6, the 6th Mishnah, it lists out attributes, ideas, and actions that are required for a person to acquire Torah, for Torah to become part of who you are, which is our job, to acquire Torah so that we can live lives of Torah, so that we can overcome spiritual challenges, we can build spiritual families and communities, and we can ultimately fulfill the purpose of the world. So interestingly, one of the requirements, so to speak, for acquiring Torah is that a person be nosei be'ol im chavero, that a person share the burdens of his fellow. An odd idea when you think about Torah as wisdom, learning, Kabbalah, Kabbalistic ideas. Torah encompasses so much practical halacha, psychological understanding. So where does it come out to be that a requirement for Torah to become part and parcel of who you are as a person is that a person show a readiness and actually act upon sharing others' burdens? So I'll begin with a story, and this is recorded in the biographical records of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement, who died right around 1880, 1882, I don't know exactly. And he's called Rabbi Yisrael Salanter because he came from a small town called Salant. And it's not really where he was born, but he got married at a young age, and being supported by his father-in-law, he moved to the city of Salant, and to continue his Torah study as a young married man. While he was studying there, he noticed something odd. One of the elders of the community, a man named Reb Zundel, would leave the study hall at a particular time every day. We'll call it 1 p.m. And he would disappear for about 45 minutes. And then he would come back and he would continue his studying. And understand, studying was very intensive. It's not like, in these small towns, it was a very elite, small group of refined scholars who had the opportunity to spend their days studying. Other than that, people had jobs. They and whatever the circumstances were in the village of Salant, I'm not that aware of it. But one day, Rabbi Yisrael, as a young scholar, decided he would slip out at 1 o'clock and he would follow Reb Zundel, this elderly sage, and see what his leaving every day at this time was all about. And he followed him through a little woods, down a hill, and it turned out that the road that connected the bigger cities passed by Salant, the small town of Salant, right at that point, and actually encountered a very steep incline up. And every day, a certain wagon driver would come by with his load. That's how he made his living. And when he came to that incline, he would get off of his wagon because the load was too heavy and the incline was too great. And he would walk behind the wagon and he would push the load up the hill. And Rav Zundel, this eminent scholar, a person who eventually moved to Israel and lived in Jerusalem and was one of the elders of Jerusalem circa 1875 in the small community that was there, he would simply walk out into the road, stand next to the wagon driver, and push along with him to get the load up the hill. Literally, in the most literal sense of the word, carrying another's burden as if it was his own. And he did this every day on a routine basis. And if you think about it in the context of the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot that we just paid attention to, that was part of his effort to study and understand Torah. He took the Mishnah literally. If I want to be a greater scholar, if I want to understand the Talmudic passage I'm studying, or if I want to be able to decide the Jewish law, the halacha, correctly, this is a requirement upon me in order for me to acquire my portion of Torah and to understand it properly. This inspired Rabbi Yisrael tremendously, and it opened up a vista of understanding that the dynamics of self-development are very complex. And an idea, you could be brilliant, you can have a great mind, but when it comes to acquiring Torah, making Torah part and parcel of who you are, it's not simply a question of brain power or hours of study, but it's an encompassing effort. And you have to look at that Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, chapter 6, Mishnah 6, and you'll see that there's many dimensions to this. Why do I mention this? Because obviously we're talking about an approach to understanding the world which defies material, physical, simple explanations. If someone were to tell you tomorrow that I won the Nobel Prize in physics because I helped somebody push their wagon up the hill every day, well, maybe physics isn't such a bad idea because maybe he was able to figure out all the different forces and master the trajectory of the incline, and he did some calculations, and they may have been breakthrough. So maybe that's a poor example, but let's say the Nobel Prize in literature. And the person tells you that the key ingredient in accomplishing that was that I helped a wagon driver push his wagon up the hill every day, we would be very skeptical. But we should begin to change our approach to thinking about Judaism and spiritual growth in spiritual terms. And the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos is teaching us that this is a spiritual dimension to growing in our understanding of the world. And in this class, putting the pieces together, we're going to play this out in a way, not necessarily explaining everything, but making it understandable. And we'll begin with another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. If you look at the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avot, Mishnah 13, it talks about there are 4 types of people, 4 categories of people, however you want to put it. One is a person who ready to give away everything to everybody. Mine is yours is yours, a righteous person. One is a person who yours is mine is mine, a selfish person. Then interestingly, in the middle category, it says someone who says mine is mine and yours. So the Mishnah first decides that's an average person. That's a mediocre person. That's what life is about. And you can even understand that as that's a good foundational point for a person to springboard to growth. Because once I get clear that what's yours is yours and I don't take from you, I don't steal, I respect your property, I watch out for your property, and then I take pride in my own property and I'm not going to waste things and I take things seriously, then you can see a person as a person then would grow from that through giving tzedakah and helping other people, and a person would become a more magnanimous, bigger, more encompassing person. But there's an opinion in that Mishnah which says, no, don't ever think that an attitude of mine is mine and yours is yours is a point of moral equilibrium. It says, because that was the essence of the people of Sodom who were destroyed in the Torah narrative a few weeks ago when we read about it. They were antithetical to the whole concept of Torah. And why? Because they see the world as totally fragmented. This is the model we're going to pursue in this class. They see the world as though there's all these things. And of course, there's you and there's me. Okay, so do I get this thing or do you get it? If I get it first, it's mine. Leave me alone. If I have 100 gallons of water and you're thirsty and need 16 ounces from me, That's tough noogies. I got the water. I'm the one who went to the well first. I'm the one who pulled the buckets out. The well went dry. You didn't get up as early as I did. C'est la vie. These attitudes, in other words, the mission in Pirkei Avos is opening up to the idea that seeing the world in this fragmented way, counting green peas, as we used to say in my family. I mean, people who sit at a table, and when you put the plates down and each person gets a nice plate of food in front of them, we call them green peas counters. Oh, that person's portion is bigger than mine. That person's portion looks better than mine. Why did my mother give that plate to her and not to me? This becomes a very atomized, competitive, predatory view of the world. And indeed, that's what Sodom, the place of Sodom that was destroyed, that's what it devolved down to. It became a place where kindness was criminalized. It was against the law to invite a guest to your home and provide them comfort and sleeping. And hence, when Lot did invite guests to his home, the place went bananas. They came to attack him. They were ready to kill everybody because it was disrupting the mindset of the place and pointing in a direction that they felt in their warped morality, they considered altruism and benefiting others as immoral. Okay? Ideas that aren't so hard to encounter anymore in the current world in which we live. So this mission in Pirkei Avos also tells us what's the mindset? It's a materialistic mindset. It's a sense of what's mine is mine. I am an individual and I take care of myself. And of course, my wife I consider like myself, and my children I consider like myself because I feel I own them. And hence, I make sure that they toe the line that I think they should, all these ancillary ideas. And each home is my castle, and I'm independent. And of course, when you think about these attitudes, there's no place for God in such a life, and there's no place of God in such a materialistic perspective. Because I'm busy counting green peas, and I'm busy acquiring for myself, and I'm busy amassing wealth, and I'm even competing. I'm number 14 on the Forbes list. But 2 years ago, I was number 27, so I'm doing well. And then if I fall from number 14 to number 18, I know I'm heading in the wrong direction, and I've got to work harder. I've got to change my direction in life. This becomes a very atomized, materialistic, fragmented view of the world. And this is the antithesis of what the goal of Torah is. So what is a person who embraces a spiritual outlook on life? What does that person look like? So first of all, I'm going to say the concept. It's very hard to wrap our heads around it, but if you think about it more, you can probably get there. It becomes an idea that anything that I give away enlarges me and enhances my being, my existence. It's a concept of being created in the image of God. What does God do all day? God, sun shines, God provides the energy into the world. We say Hazon et Olam, God feeds the entire world. We say in the Psalm that God supervises the fact that every little baby bird in a remote nest in a tree, God supervises the fact that it should get its sustenance every day. God is constantly giving away. And therefore, God is the ultimate being and the most permanent being that exists. And of course, we need to take in order to continue existing. That's true. But when we see ourselves as growing by imitating God and by giving to others, by, so to speak, becoming a person who everyone has benefited from me. That's what God promised Abraham at the outset, Agadel Shemecha, your name will become great. His name didn't become great because he was number one on the Forbes list and maintained that perch through thick and thin. That's not the way his name became great. His name became great because more and more and more people in the world benefited from him. And in an ultimate spiritual sense, we have sages in the Talmud who, in their merit, an entire generation was fed and received sustenance from the world. And hence, when there was a famine or when things were not going well, one individual could stand up before God and say, provide for your nation, provide for your people, let the rain fall. And God responded to that person. Why? Because that person wasn't saying, I need my grass to grow and I need to maintain my position on the Forbes list and I need to feed my cattle so that I can remain with my wealth and my well-being. But rather that person was saying, not only am I thirsty, but my friend is thirsty, and his thirst makes me feel more thirsty. And I feel for the entire people. And I feel the disconnect of people from being able to freely study Torah, pray to God, connect to God under such harsh circumstances. So hence, I'm ready to become the spokesperson on behalf of my fellow man, because I have enlarged my being through my connection to others. I think we can hear that. The Alter of Kelm, a man who was a key disciple of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, one we talked about before, who saw his teacher leave the study hall every day to help push the wagon up the hill. He connects this attribute of nosei ba'ol im chavero, carrying another's burden, with the entire idea of being a melech, of being a king. He says, what is a king? A king takes upon his shoulders responsibility for the well-being of a nation. That's the Jewish spiritual definition of being a king. So hence, when we have the Amidah, when we pray to God every day, in the middle of those 19 blessings that we make, we say, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed you Hashem, Melech, Ohev, Tzedakah, Umishpat. God is our king who loves, who cherishes tzedakah, righteousness, kindness, compassion, umishpat, and the balance of having justice, not stealing from other people, keeping things in order. That defines God as the king of the world. So whenever we say, Baruch atah Hashem, Melech ha'olam, when we refer to God as the king of the world, we're referring to the fact that God's being encompasses the world, because God is intimately involved in feeding us and sheltering us and keeping us going, sustaining the world. And we enlarge ourselves in this spiritual world by giving away, by sharing, by showing concern for another, by genuinely celebrating my friend and my fellow person's good fortune, the way the Ramban Nachmanides defines the mitzvah of love your neighbor as yourself, and genuinely sharing in his sadness or his travail when things don't go his way. So it's a sense of connectivity. It's a sense of taking a fragmented world. There's me and there's you, okay? And we are two individuals, but we feel a connection to one another, so that your happiness is something I can share in. And when I share with you my good fortune, it's because I have the hope that rather than provoking jealousy, or rather than provoking any enmity, that you'll say that you'll share in that happiness, it'll make you happier as well. And of course, by me being ready to share with others and to use my good fortune for the benefit not only of myself, but for others as well, you can see how this just magnifies things. Now, this brings us to a particular story in this week's Torah reading. This week's Torah reading is Parshat VaYetze, and it's breathtaking in its scope. It begins with Jacob escaping from the wrath of his twin brother Esau, leaving with nothing, arriving at the city of Haran, where a generation before his mother became betrothed to his father. He arrives with nothing. And at the end of the Torah portion, he leaves married to his two primary wives, Rachel and Leah, daughters of Lavan, and to two maidservants with 11 children. And we see already the formation of Bnei Yisrael. We see the flourishing of the Jewish people. And in a certain sense, you could almost say this foreshadows the whole creation of the Jewish people in Egypt. In very antagonistic circumstances, the Jewish people grew and developed and became a nation. That's what we talk about on Pesach night when we recount the travail of being enslaved in Egypt. At the same time, we blossomed there into a people. under very trying circumstances of living together with his father-in-law, Lavan, the family of Jacob blossomed and entered into already the configuration of being Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, which is a very esteemed high spiritual perch, which we have access to yet today. So what's Rachel's story? Rachel is, and we'll take a look at reading it. If you turn to page 148 in the Art Scroll Chumash, chapter 29, it begins in sentence 9, and we'll just do this quickly since we've had a long introduction. While Jacob was speaking with the fellow shepherds, sentence 9, page 149 in English, Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherdess. And it was then when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, and the flock of Lavan, his mother's brother, Jacob came forward and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well, watered the sheep of Lavan, his mother. Role reversal here compared to his mother Rivka giving water to Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. Here it's Jacob providing the sustenance. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, he raised his voice, and he wept. Okay. You hear the music playing in the background, very dramatic, very romantic, perhaps. There's a lot to grapple with here. But what stands out here? What does it mean he wept? So Rashi says right here, he didn't weep. It wasn't because of the violin music in the background that caused him to weep. He was a prophet. Rachel is a prophetess. Leah is a prophetess. It means these are people that, not that they're fortune tellers, but they live on a dimension in this physical, materialistic world of prophecy, like the past and the present and even the future is all surrounding them. And hence Rashi says, Jacob weeps because he recognizes right away the fact that here is a wife to be in Rachel, and he identifies her over and over again as his mother's, as the daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, and the sheep are the sheep of Lavan, his mother's brother. So he sees the connection to the grandeur of his mother, Rivka, and he sees the spiritual greatness within her. And he weeps, Rashi says, because he foresees that even though he's finding her as his wife, he will not be buried together with her. Unlike Rivka, who's buried in the Merat Machpelah in Hebron next to her husband, Isaac, he foresees that that's not going to be the case. So right away, with a prophetic dimension to his vision of life, Jacob sees that things aren't going to be so smooth. The picture is not going to be so perfect. The violin music is not going to prove to be true. And what do we know the story is? In very, very brief outline terms, we understand the story that Jacob, understanding the nature of his future father-in-law Lavan, he communicates to Rachel a secret code that on their wedding night, she will know that it's him and he will know that it's her in order to avoid any trickery on the part of her father. Lo and behold, as the Torah says a few sentences later, in the morning after the wedding, Yaakov discovers that it's Leah, the older sister he's married to, and not Rachel, the one he was intended to, that he worked for 7 years in order to marry. How did this happen? So right away, we have traditions, we have Talmudic sources, we have prophetic sources from the book of Isaiah, that when Rachel contemplated the embarrassment that her sister would suffer if she was discovered not to be the intended wife in front of the public, in front of all the people gathered at the wedding, even the humiliation in front of her husband to be Jacob, she was willing to give up her status as the future wife of Jacob in order to protect her sister's well-being. In other words, to use the model we're looking at here, she felt a connection, a oneness. She understood that if her sister were to be publicly humiliated, that would be intolerable pain for her. And hence she was ready to give away her status, her future, the opportunity to be the mother of the Jewish people. What does that lead to? It leads to a tradition that we have, which is that in the worst of times, when the Jewish people really lose our way, it is only the voice, the prayers, the outcry of this woman, Rachel, that reaches God's throne and convinces God to continue connecting to the Jewish people. The moment being, we're going to find later on that Rachel is buried by the side of the road, and why is she buried there? Eventually, Jacob explains to Rachel's son Joseph that I buried her there prophetically because there would be a time in the future, namely when the temple was destroyed and the Jewish people were cast out of the land of Israel, that the Jewish people would travel down this very road in exile, and it would be the crying, passing the grave of Rachel, of this woman who with such selflessness gave up this opportunity. It would be her prayers that would move God, not the prayers of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, not the prayers of Moshe or Aaron, not the prayers of any of the great recognized leaders and advocates on behalf of the Jewish people, but it would be singularly her voice that would convince the Jewish people otherwise. And I just want to show you something that, this sounds, fanciful. I'm going to share the screen here for a second. I hope you can see this, but I want to show you something. The symbol of the land of Israel. I got to Israel in 1968-69. This is almost what it looked like. This is Rachel's tomb. This is where this person is buried on the side of the road. This is an actual photograph from circa 1900, and I couldn't find the actual National Geographic article about the Holy Land from the early 1900s, which has a photograph very similar to this. But what do you see here? You see a roadway, and you see intact, not exactly the way Jacob buried her, but you see intact the grave of Rachel waiting on the side of the road as the point, as the geographical point of advocacy on behalf of the Jewish people. That's the story here. Now, how do we understand this story? And by like I say, when I went to Israel, then what do we hold near? Everything is a ruin. You go to Hebron and you see the burial place of the matriarchs and patriarchs of the Jewish people, where Jacob rests next to his other wife, Leah, Rachel's sister. And it really is a ruin. It's underground. It's covered over by a mosque. You go to the Temple Mount. It's a place of destruction where a mosque rests over there. Go to one holy place after another. You're looking at ruins. Strangely enough, and with great significance, Rachel's tomb stood where it was undisturbed. And I dare say that the reason it stood that way throughout these centuries, in distinction to everything else that we hold precious in the land of Israel, was because of this enduring position that Rachel claimed for herself as the eternal advocate on behalf of the Jewish people. Now, what gives her the standing to make that advocacy? I'm only going to deal, in the interest of time, with the view of the Maharal. The Maharal takes a very unique approach to explaining why Rachel, out of all of the heroes and founders and matriarchs and patriarchs of the Jewish people and all the great prophets we had, and every single personage that we read about in the entire Bible, only her voice could carry through. And here's the way the Maharal explains it. It says, because being a prophetess, when Rachel and Jacob encountered each other for the first time, Jacob foresaw right away, this is my wife, but things are not going to be so simple. And of course, we know in the end of the day, the 12 tribes of the Jewish people were born by 4 different mothers. Leah was the mother of 6 of the 12 tribes. Rachel was the mother of 2, Joseph and Benjamin, and she died upon the birth of Benjamin right in that very place where she's buried. And Bilhah and Zilpah, the other two maidservants, each were the mother of two of the tribes. And here's what the Maharal says: Rachel, more so than any other human being ever, understood that the world that we live in is a fragmented world, and therefore perfection eludes us. Ultimate oneness eludes us. Now we relate to a God who is ultimately one. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem has perfect oneness. But that's for the future. As we say at the end of the Aleinu prayer, Bayam Alhu Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. A sentence from Zechariah, the prophet. In the end of days will God truly be one and his name one. But until then, we're making our way in a world that is fragmented, that does present to us myriad moral challenges and choices, how selfish we want to be, how much we want to put ourselves ahead of others, or how much we're willing to grow in magnitude and see ourselves as ultimately givers more so than takers, see ourselves more as beings in the image of God who are able to grow through giving and enrich ourselves through sharing what we have, and become bigger people by carrying someone else's burden and sharing in their sorrows and reveling in their joys together with them. That's the roadmap. No one was more tuned into that than Rachel. And how does the Maharal know that? Because that's why at the moment of her wedding night, when the choice was, do I keep silent and watch my sister go to the chuppah and be rejected as a fraud, which she was, or do I rather abdicate my future standing as the mother of the 12 tribes, such a tremendously tense, fraught moral moment in the life of this young woman? Here's what she told herself. I don't know what God's ultimate plan is, but we haven't reached the end of days yet. Things are not going to be so perfect. There's going to be a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. And who knows exactly who is going to be the mother, the ultimate mother of the Jewish people. And therefore, I'm willing to feel so deeply for others, because in this fragmented world, we're more in need of one another than we ever will be in this ultimate future where there's a total oneness in the world. And that's what gave Rachel the moral strength and the commitment not to delay a moment, but rather to fully cooperate with Lavan's terrible trickery, but to give her sister the opportunity to take her place, so to speak, as the matriarch of the Jewish people, because she understood the perfect Hollywood script with the violins playing in the background has Jacob and me riding off into the sunset together, and me being the mother of 12 tribes of the Jewish people in perfect harmony and unity, with two parents having 12 children, having daughters also. Maybe Dina would be in the mix as well, but it would be a sense of harmony and bliss and oneness. But she understood that that expectation defies reality. We live in a world that requires tikkun olam. We need to repair the world. And the way we repair the world is by learning to grow through giving, to grow through connecting with others, to grow through being more compassionate and more connected with one another and more concerned about one another, and ultimately being able to place those concerns above ourselves. And that is why her resting place is undisturbed. Now, heartbreakingly, in the last 15, 18 years, it's been covered over by tons and tons of concrete in order to make it a little enclave and land that was given away to others. It's still the same place. It's still the same resting place. It just has a vast building covering it, but it's still there undisturbed. You can go there. It's a 15-minute ride out of Jerusalem, 10-minute ride out of Jerusalem today. It was always ignored. Historically, thousands of people would come to Bethlehem to celebrate Christmas every year. That doesn't happen anymore because Christians are simply not welcome there. But her grave sat there undisturbed. Her place in God's universe was clear. This is the place from which a true voice of compassion, of caring, of ultimate selflessness emanates up to the Shemayim. And that's a voice that has to be sustained in order for us to continue making progress slowly but slowly within the fragmented world that we live in. As we are repairing it, we're sewing it back together, we're putting the pieces back together one by one kindness, one visiting a mourner at home and sharing in their sadness, one celebrating a joyous occasion with somebody else with a full heart. A friend of mine said publicly at our recent family wedding, he said the week before his own grandson got married, and he says he feels just as joyous attending the wedding that we held last week as he did attending his own grandson's wedding. That's the voice of Rachel speaking in the world. That's the voice of eliminating fragmentation, seeing a bigger picture, seeing ourselves within a collective, seeing that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. Each member of the Jewish people has an intrinsic connection to every other member. That's the essence of our people. That enables us to understand Torah, our spiritual legacy, and make it our own and absorb it into our system. That enables us to reach levels where we can sustain the world the way God intends it to be, until such time as the prophet Zechariah says, B'yamahu, there will be a day, Yeh Hashem Echad, where God's oneness will be manifest and clear to every living, breathing being on earth. All the prophecies we know, the lion and the lamb will be best friends. The place of the Jewish people as ambassadors of God will be permanently secured, and all mankind will benefit from us, from whatever knowledge we have, whatever Torah we have, whatever wisdom we have, will be the exemplars of kindness and compassion and goodness. That's the future. Let's keep working ourselves in that direction, and let's never become daunted, because that's only the ultimate future. In the meantime, we work our way through plan B and plan C and plan D and plan E. We cobble together a B'nai Yisrael, a children of Israel from 4 different mothers, which has its own fault lines of divisiveness and competition, which we all know gets played out throughout Jewish history. We have to overcome that. We can overcome it. We just need to tune into the attitude and the vision and the prophetic understanding that Rachel Imenu represents for us, that we are inextricably connected with one another, and that if we want to become greater, if we want to become more, take what you have on every level and share it with others. You become greater, the Jewish people become greater, the world becomes a greater place, and we fulfill the mission of mankind.